its scalability problems, but I will not talk about scalability. I'll talk about things that makes crypto different from what was before crypto, about decentralization, disintermediation, and censorship resistance. And I'll show that DAG is more disintermediated, more censorship resistant than blockchain. In blockchains, you as a user do not have direct access to the ledger. When you want to add a transaction to the ledger, you have to go through the miners. It is the miners, block producers, who decide if your transaction will be included into the next block. It is the miners who have exclusive access to blocks and have the power to decide if your transaction is accepted or not. Miners serve as a middleman. They are middlemen that stand between you and the ledger. And in practice, there is usually a small number of block producers, miners or mining pools that collectively control more than half of the total mining power. For example, in Bitcoin, there are only four mining pools that control more than half, and in Ethereum, only 2. Should they collude, they could block any transaction from entering the blocks. Over years, many blockchain designs have been proposed that vary in how block producers are selected, but still block producers serve as gatekeepers, and every transaction has to pass through the gatekeepers, through the miners. And if miners do not accept your transaction, it doesn't exist in the ledger. So it is a problem that is inevitable in blockchains, and in order to solve it, rather than inventing another way of selecting block producers, we have to radically change the design and eliminate blocks and block producers completely. And instead of connecting blocks, we connect transactions directly by having each transaction include a hash of the previous transaction, one or more previous transactions. And as a result, we get a structure that is known in mathematics as directed assembly graph DAG. Now, access to the ledger is completely direct, disintermediated. When you want to add a transaction to the ledger, you just add it. Select a few parent transactions, add your own data, sign, broadcast to peers, done. There is nobody who could stop you from doing so, and the transaction is already in the ledger. It is the most decentralized, most disintermediated, and most censorship-resistant way of adding transactions into a ledger. You can think of DAG as the third stage of the evolution of ledgers. First, there were centralized ledgers, where there was only a single gatekeeper. Then came blockchains, where we have a few gatekeepers who accept transactions into the ledger. And finally, in DAG, there are no gatekeepers at all. Users just add their transactions directly to the ledger without asking anybody for permission. Now, with so much freedom, it should not be chaos. All nodes on the network should still agree about the state of the ledger. And the agreement or consensus generally means agreement about two things: what happened and in what order. The first part is easy. In DAG, every transaction that was posted by anybody, that was added to the ledger by anybody, it exists. It happened. It can reach different nodes at different moments in time, but still it will reach all nodes, and all nodes will eventually know that this transaction did happen. If it were a blockchain, block producers would decide what happened. Whatever a block producer decided to include into his block did happen. What he didn't include didn't happen. Block producers also decide about the order of transactions. They are allowed to order them within a block as they like. Now, how do we order transactions in a DAG? Just because it is a DAG, there is already a lot of order. Every transaction references one or more parents. Parents, in turn, reference their own parents. And if we can reach one transaction from the other by following parent-child links, we already know the order between those two transactions. The order between transactions doesn't directly follow from the structure, from the shape of the DAG, if the two transactions lie on parallel branches of the DAG. And in order to resolve this ambiguity, we rely on so-called order providers. We also call them witnesses. Order providers are just regular users who are supposed to post their transactions frequently enough and strictly in order. That means that their previous transaction is reachable from their next transaction through parent-child links. And we have to trust them to follow this rule, to never break it. And in order to rationally trust them to do so, we require them to be individuals or organizations with known identities and to have something to lose in case they misbehave, such as reputation or a business that is based on trust. Order providers are selected by users. Every user just indicates the list of order providers he trusts in every transaction that he posts. And the list includes 12 positions. The number 12 is small enough so that users can realistically know all 12. And the number is large enough so that the system survives random failures of a minority of order providers. And the list of order providers can vary a bit from user to user, from transaction to transaction, but they should differ by no more than one position for neighboring transactions. Now that we have order providers, we can highlight their positions on the DAG and order all other transactions around the order created by order providers. It is possible to create such an algorithm. However, the order is not established immediately. We have to wait for some time until enough order provider transactions are posted on the DAG in order to be certain about the order of the past transactions. And since the order is determined solely based on the positions of the order provider transactions on the DAG, and all nodes will eventually receive all transactions, we know that all nodes will receive all transactions, including order provider transactions, and will arrive at the same order of events. So now we have an agreement about what happened. After the transaction that was posted, it did happen. And we have an agreement about the order of events. It either follows from the shape of the DAG or is determined by looking at the order provider transactions. This is the type of a consensus we have in Obyte. And although the admission of transactions into the ledger is totally decentralized, order provision in Obyte is currently still centralized, since 10 out of 12 order providers are still controlled by the founder, that is me, and only 2 are independent. And we are looking for candidates willing to serve as order providers and help us decentralize order provision. And I'm happy to say that the University of Nicosia is currently setting up the order provider node and will be a candidate for order provider. Now, how do we resolve double spans? We agree that if there are two transactions trying to spend the same coin, the same output, the one that came earlier on the consensus order is accepted, the other one is invalidated. The order between those two double spans is immediately obvious when there is a partial order between those two transactions. In this case, everyone just rejects the double span attempt. If there is no partial order between the two double spans, the order between them is not immediately obvious, and the protocol prescribes to accept both and wait until the order is established with the help of the order providers. Then the earlier one wins, and the later one, the later double span, is invalidated. Although invalidated, the failed double span still stays on the ledger because it is already connected to a number of other transactions that didn't break any rules, that didn't know that this transaction would become a double spend, and orphaning those innocent transactions would break our fundamental rule that every valid transaction is accepted. And this, again, is a very important rule that makes the whole system strongly censorship resistant. Because assume that the majority or even all order providers collude to censor a specific transaction. They could, of course, refuse to accept this transaction as parent in their own transaction, but it can still be included through other transactions that do not participate in censorship. And once the unwelcome transaction is posted into the DAG, it quickly acquires children, grandchildren, and so on, and the number grows like snowball, and all those transactions have to be censored too in order to censor just a single transaction. And essentially, the conspirators have to sabotage the entire network in order to censor just a single transaction. To conclude, DAG stays censorship resistant even when order providers collude, and is therefore more censorship resistant than a blockchain which fails in similar conditions. And this follows from the main property of DAG that admission into the ledger is totally disintermediated and irreversible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony.